Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong simply because of the way you look? Imagine checking into a luxury hotel, wearing your best suit, only to have staff laugh at your request for dinner in your room. Now picture being told, "People like you don't deserve service here." That's exactly what happened to Malcolm Reed, except there was one thing the staff didn't know. He wasn't just another guest. He was the black CEO who owned a controlling stake in the very hotel they worked for. Within minutes, the entire balance of power shifted. But here's the question. When the world humiliates you, do you lash out in anger, or do you hold your ground, reveal your truth, and turn humiliation into lasting change? If it were you, standing in that lobby with strangers staring, what choice would you make? Would you walk away quietly, or would you claim your dignity in front of them all? Stay with me, because this story will challenge the way you see respect, power, and justice. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter. The Summit Crown Hotel looked like a cathedral of glass and marble that evening. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over the lobby. Polished limestone floors gleamed like still water. And a line of guests in tuxedos and sequined gowns stretched toward the front desk. Into that line stepped a man who didn't look like the others. Malcolm Reed wore a gray travel jacket, not a tailored suit. His sneakers were clean but ordinary. He carried no designer luggage, just a slim leather bag worn soft by years of travel. He didn't need to stand out. He never had. Malcolm had come straight from a late board call. He hadn't shaved since morning. His hair was cropped short, flecked with the first gray of his late 30s. His eyes, though calm, carried a quiet weight, the look of someone who had endured more assumptions in life than most people could count. He stepped forward with his reservation confirmation in hand. "Good evening. I'm checking into the penthouse." The desk clerk, Sophie Lang, glanced at the screen, then at him, and let out a small laugh she thought was private. "Sir, the penthouse is reserved for our most exclusive guests." "I know," Malcolm said, voice even. "It's under Reed." She tilted her head, lips curling. "We don't usually get walk-ins like you for that suite." "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Behind Malcolm, a couple in evening wear whispered. A man in a navy suit chuckled low, shaking his head. It wasn't the words that stung, it was the tone. The suggestion that he didn't belong, couldn't belong. Malcolm took a slow breath, remembering his mother's advice from decades ago. Don't let them see you crack. "Son, calm is power." He tried again, polite but firm. "It's prepaid. Can you please confirm?" Sophie clicked a few keys, her brows knitting together in performative concern. Then she leaned toward her manager, Harold Whitman, a stout man with a clipped mustache. She whispered, just loud enough for the line to hear, "He says he's booked the penthouse." Whitman looked Malcolm over skin, shoes, bag, and smirked. "Sir, that suite is $25,000 a night. We can't just hand over a key because you say you have it. If you'd like, I can direct you to a standard king." Malcolm's throat tightened. He remembered being 15, standing in a convenience store, accused of shoplifting a soda he never touched. Same dismissive eyes, same unshakable presumption. "I'll need to see your ID," Whitman barked, already signaling to a security guard by the elevators. Malcolm handed over his license and the printed confirmation. Whitman looked at the ID, then back at Malcolm, and pushed the papers back across the counter. "Not good enough? We've had scams before." The guard, Carl Benson, stepped forward, posture rigid. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Gas rippled through the lobby. Phones tilted upward. Little red lights blinked as cameras rolled. Malcolm stood there, heart steady, though inside, anger clawed at his ribs. He wanted to shout, "I own more of this building than you'll ever touch." But instead, he remembered his father's voice. "Don't waste your thunder. Save it for the right storm." Carl reached for his arm. Malcolm pulled back gently. "No need to put hands on me. I'll step outside." The whispers grew louder. A teenager in line whispered to her friend, "They're throwing him out." Did you see Malcolm walked out of the glowing lobby, past glass doors that reflected his own tired face back at him? The night air of downtown Manhattan was cool, sharp with the scent of rain on concrete. He stood under the awning, fists in his pockets, chest rising and falling. He felt the humiliation settle heavy. Not for himself, he had armor built over decades, but for every young man who might watch that video online and see confirmation of the same cruel story. "You don't belong here." For a moment, doubt whispered in his ear. Should I have fought back inside? Should I have shouted my name? Dropped the weight of who I am? But then another thought rose. Calm, steady, undeniable. No. They'll know soon enough. And when they do, the lesson will be written in stone, not words. Malcolm pulled out his phone. A single text glowed on the lock screen from his chief of staff. Clara James acquisition press release scheduled in 15. "Do you want me to hold?" Malcolm typed back one word, "now." Inside the lobby, Sophie laughed with another clerk. Harold adjusted his tie, proud of his firm handling. Guests whispered about the man turned away. And then, within minutes, phones in the same lobby buzzed with alerts. Bloomberg, CNN, The Wall Street Journal. Reed Global Hospitality acquires Summit Crown Hotel for $5.4 billion. A pause fell over the marble hall. Heads turned toward the glass doors. The man they had just thrown out stood there, back straight, eyes calm, waiting, and for the first time that evening, silence cut sharper than any insult. The cool night air steadied Malcolm's pulse. The sting of humiliation was still there, raw and heavy, but beneath it flowed something else, resolve. He pulled his coat tighter and walked down the block, away from the glow of the Summit Crown's glass facade. The city was alive, yellow cabs weaving through traffic, steam rising from subway grates, a saxophone spilling notes from a corner. He moved like any other man ending a long day, invisible in the crowd. That anonymity was intentional. For months he had planned this evening every clause of the deal, every line of the press release, every digit in the acquisition. Tonight wasn't just a business move. It was personal. Malcolm slipped into a quiet cafe across the street. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, the way his late father used to. As he sat by the window, the cafe television flickered to breaking news. The anchor's voice was measured but urgent. Reed Global Hospitality has finalized its $5.4 billion purchase of Summit Crown Hotels, one of the most prestigious luxury chains in the country. The acquisition expands Reed Global's portfolio to over 180 properties worldwide. Effective immediately, Malcolm Reed becomes the majority owner. The barista looked from the screen to Malcolm, then back again, eyes widening. Malcolm just smiled, small and steady. His phone vibrated. Clara James. He answered. "Malcolm," she said, her voice tight with both relief and curiosity. "The release is out. Media's running wild. Do you want me to prep the official statement now?" "Not yet," Malcolm replied. He kept his tone calm, but there was steel underneath. Tonight's lesson isn't about headlines. It's about accountability. Clara hesitated. "You're going back there, aren't you?" "Yes." A long pause. Then, softly, "Then let me remind you, don't lose your calm. You don't need anger to prove your strength." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I know." As he hung up, memories pressed in. He was 16 again, sitting in the bleachers after a basketball game, sweat still drying on his jersey. The coach had walked past him, praising every other player but skipping his name. Later that night, his mother had said, "Malcolm, sometimes silence is the loudest insult, but dignity is louder still. You don't answer every slight with noise. You answer with truth." That truth was now glowing on 100 screens across the city. But it wasn't enough to own the building on paper. He had to own the moment, too. Malcolm finished his coffee, left a $20 bill on the counter, and stepped back into the night. The rain had begun a thin drizzle misting the sidewalks, making the streetlights shimmer. He walked back toward the hotel slowly, each step measured, as though pacing himself for a stage he knew he was about to walk onto. Inside the lobby, the mood had shifted. Guests were checking their phones, showing each other the news, whispering. Sophie still worked the desk, but her face was pale, her earlier confidence chipped away by doubt. Harold strutted near the concierge, unaware of the growing tension around him. Through the glass doors, people saw Malcolm returning. A hush followed him inside. This time no guard blocked his way. Even Carl Benson, the security officer, stepped back, uneasy. Malcolm stopped in the center of the marble floor. The world felt suspended, as though waiting. He could hear the tick of the grand clock above reception, the soft hum of the fountain in the atrium, the faint buzz of a phone recording him from behind. He didn't speak yet. He let the silence stretch. Let the weight of his presence settle into every corner of that glittering lobby. And then, gently, he said, "Good evening again." The words were simple, but the tone was different now. No longer a guest pleading for service. It was the calm authority of a man who knew he owned not just the penthouse, but the ground they all stood on. Harold scoffed, stepping forward. "You again, I thought I made it clear." But he stopped. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it. The blood drained from his face. Around him, more guests whispered. A man in a tuxedo muttered, "That's him. He's the new owner." Sophie's hands trembled on the keyboard. Carl shifted his weight, unsure if he should salute or apologize. Malcolm lifted his phone and held it up for everyone to see. The headline glowed, "Reed Global completes acquisition of Summit Crown." He looked at Harold, then Sophie. His voice stayed soft. "I told you, my name is Reed." Gas rippled through the lobby. Someone near the bar started recording live. The lens caught Sophie's stunned face, Harold's slack jaw, Carl's shifting posture, and Malcolm's calm, unshakable stance. For a brief moment, Malcolm felt the old temptation rise, the urge to gloat, to shout his triumph into their shame. But he resisted. He knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. He let his gaze sweep the lobby, meeting the eyes of strangers, allies he never asked for, but who now bore witness. He thought of every boardroom where he'd been underestimated, every flight where he'd been mistaken for anything but the man signing contracts at 30,000 feet. Tonight was not just for him. It was for all of them. The silence thickened until even the fountain seemed to hush. Malcolm's voice broke it at last. "I have business to finish here, and we'll finish it together." The lobby of the Summit Crown was no longer humming with casual chatter. It felt charged, almost electric. Guests who had come for champagne receptions and gala dinners were now craning their necks, phones raised, documenting every second. What had begun as a quiet humiliation was turning into a spectacle no one could have scripted. Malcolm Reed stood at the center of it, still in his gray jacket, rain clinging to the shoulders. He hadn't changed a thing about himself since being thrown out. Yet everything about the room had changed around him. Harold Whitman, the manager, broke the silence first. His voice, once dripping with smug certainty, cracked with doubt. "This is some kind of publicity stunt. You think waving a headline proves you belong here?" Malcolm tilted his phone so the screen caught the light. The breaking news banner scrolled across it. Reed Global finalizes. Acquisition of Summit Crown. He lowered the phone, meeting Harold's gaze. "It's not a stunt. It's ownership. And I don't just belong here. Mr. Whitman, this place now belongs to me." The word struck like a gavel. A few guests gasped. Someone whispered, "He owns it." Another murmured, "That's the man. Reed Global. Sophie Lang, the front desk clerk." Froze. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers trembling. She replayed her own dismissive laugh in her head, realizing the cameras had caught it, realizing the world outside these walls might soon watch it too. Carl Benson, the security guard, stepped back, guilt flooding his face. He hadn't shoved Malcolm out, but he hadn't defended him either. He'd followed orders, and in following orders, he had helped write himself into this unfolding disaster. Malcolm let the silence linger. He had learned long ago that silence was power sometimes greater than words. In those long seconds, the weight of his presence grew. He did not need to shout, did not need to argue. He simply stood, calm and steady, as the truth settled into every corner of the marble hall. Harold tried again, desperate. "Even if you did, even if this deal is real, you can't just march in here," and Malcolm cut him off, voice level, almost gentle. "I don't march. I walk where I belong. And tonight, I belong right here." The fountain bubbled in the background. Glasses clinked faintly at the bar. No one dared to interrupt. A young guest near the staircase whispered into her live stream, "This is unreal. They threw him out and now he's the owner. Oh my God." Thousands of hearts floated up the screen as viewers tuned in. Malcolm turned slowly, not just addressing Harold, but the room, the witnesses, the strangers holding their phones aloft. This isn't about a suite. It's not about whether someone wears sneakers or carries a designer bag. It's about dignity. And what happened here tonight was more than a mistake. It was a statement, one that told me, and everyone watching, who you think deserves respect and who does not. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. Harold shifted uncomfortably, sweat darkening his collar. Carl lowered his eyes, unable to meet Malcolm's steady gaze. Malcolm paused, taking a slow breath. Inside, he felt the tug of conflicting forces. Anger, sharp and insistent, pressed at him, urging him to unleash all the scorn he had endured. But there was another current, deeper and stronger, the knowledge that his true power was not in anger, but in restraint. His victory would not be shouting them down. His victory would be in showing what leadership looked like, even here, in the ashes of humiliation. He lifted his chin, steady. "So yes, I am Malcolm Reed, and I don't need permission to stand in the lobby of my own hotel." The declaration rang through the space like a bell. Guests shifted, some clapping softly, others shaking their heads in stunned disbelief. The live stream count soared higher. Malcolm felt the weight of history pressing close, the long years of being doubted, questioned, underestimated. He remembered his father's weary voice after losing a promotion to a less qualified colleague. He remembered his own early days, pitching investors who nodded politely but never wrote checks until a white partner repeated the same pitch word for word. He remembered, most of all, the quiet promise he had made to himself one day. They won't just see me, they will answer to me. And here he was. Harold's voice, brittle now, tried to regain ground. You can't just fire people on the spot. There are procedures, contracts. Malcolm raised a hand, calm but final. Procedures will be followed. But make no mistake, accountability will come. Tonight is not about contract. Tonight is about consequences. He let his words fall heavy, deliberate, like stones into still water. Each ripple reached further, carrying the truth across the room. For the first time all evening, Malcolm smiled small, restrained, but certain. It wasn't the smile of a man gloating. It was the smile of a man reclaiming his place, not just in a hotel, but in a world that too often had tried to push him to the margins. The lobby seemed to breathe again, as though everyone inside had been holding air. Some clapped louder now, uncertain but compelled. Others whispered furiously into their phones. And Malcolm, standing in the middle of it all, felt the shift. The story was no longer theirs to write. It was his. He looked at Sophie, Harold, Carl, each of them caught in the glow of cameras, each of them realizing that their choices tonight would be remembered long after the lights dimmed. Tomorrow, Malcolm said quietly, we'll talk about where this hotel is headed. But tonight, let it be clear, dignity is not optional, and no one gets to take it away. With that, he turned, walking calmly toward the grand staircase. The crowd parted instinctively, not just out of respect, but out of the undeniable truth that the man they had dismissed minutes ago now owned every step beneath their feet. The lobby, though still buzzing, had taken on the feel of a courtroom. Guests stood in clusters, whispering into their phones, recording from every angle. The air smelled faintly of champagne and rain-soaked coats, but beneath it ran the charged scent of reckoning. Malcolm Reed didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He moved towards the front desk, placed his phone on the counter, and tapped the speaker button. "Edward," he said evenly, "patch in." A crisp voice answered, echoing through the marble hall. "Mr. Reed, I'm here." It was Edward Cole, Reed Global's Chief of Human Resources. Guests leaned closer. Harold Whitman's jaw tightened, the sweat on his temple glistening beneath the chandelier. Sophie's lips parted, as if to form an apology. But no words came. Carl Benson shifted uneasily, arms crossed over his chest, but eyes darting everywhere but at Malcolm. "Edward," Malcolm began, tone calm but deliberate. "Please read the summary of employee complaints filed against Summit Crown over the past 3 years." There was a pause. Then Edward's professional cadence filled the room. 19 verified complaints citing racial discrimination. 5 settlements under non-disclosure agreements. Total payouts exceeding $640,000. Multiple accounts describe consistent behavior from mid-level management, including one, Harold Whitman. The name hung in the air like a hammer falling. Heads turned to Harold. He sputtered, red rising to his face. Those were baseless. Malcolm raised a hand, silencing him with nothing more than a look. "Edward, thank you. That's enough for now?" "Yes, Mr. Reed," Edward replied, awaiting further instruction. Malcolm pressed the screen, ending the call. The silence that followed was absolute, Even the fountain seemed muted, its steady trickle overshadowed by the weight of the moment. He turned back to Harold, eyes steady. Effective immediately. "You are terminated for cause." The word struck harder than any shout could have. Harold's mouth opened, then closed again. His hands trembled at his sides. You can't just—" Malcolm pulled a folder from his bag and laid it on the counter. Inside, the ink still fresh, was the finalized acquisition paperwork bearing his signature. "I can't." "And I just did." Phones lifted higher. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Someone whispered, "He's firing him right here." Harold's face contorted. "You'll regret this. I've run this hotel for 15 years. I know people." "And in those 15 years," Malcolm interrupted, "you've forgotten the simplest truth. People are not measured by how expensive their suit is, or what car drops them at the curb. They are measured by how they treat others when no one is watching. And tonight, the world was watching. For the first time." Harold faltered. His bluster cracked, leaving only the raw face of a man exposed. Malcolm turned his gaze to Sophie. Her cheeks were wet now, tears cutting paths through her makeup. "I didn't mean," she whispered. "You laughed," Malcolm said, his voice still gentle but firm. "Not once. Twice. And you thought no one would notice. But I noticed. Every guest you dismissed noticed. And now, so does everyone beyond these walls." Sophie lowered her head, shame burning. Malcolm then looked at Carl, the security guard. "You had a choice. You could have questioned an order that didn't feel right. You could have asked yourself if dignity mattered more than protocol. Instead, you chose silence. Do you understand the weight of that?" Carl swallowed hard, voice low. "Yes, sir. I do." Malcolm studied him a moment longer. Unlike Harold, Carl's eyes weren't defiant. They were heavy with regret. "We'll speak again. Your future depends on what you do next." The lobby felt suspended, every person holding their breath, waiting for what Malcolm would say next. He stepped back, centered himself, and spoke not just to those 3 employees but to everyone present. "This isn't about punishing a few individuals. This is about what this building will stand for from tonight onward. I will not allow Summit Crown to remain a symbol of exclusion. This will be a place where respect is the minimum standard, not a luxury offered only to some." A murmur of approval swept the crowd. Someone clapped once, hesitant, then stopped. Malcolm let the silence stretch again. He had learned to use pauses the way musicians use rests, each one building anticipation, forcing listeners to lean in. "Finally," he said, "to those of you who witnessed what happened tonight, remember it. Hold us accountable. Hold me accountable. Because dignity denied anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere." The line struck the air like thunder. Phones caught it, streaming it out into the digital ether, where it would soon be replayed by millions. Malcolm picked up his phone, ended the speaker session, and tucked it back into his jacket. His expression softened, but his stance remained unshakable. Tonight was about truth. Tomorrow will be about change. He turned, and the lobby erupted not in applause, but in the stunned buzz of voices, the tap of frantic fingers on screens, the whisper of history shifting in real time. And Malcolm walked calmly through it all. Every step a statement. This was not revenge. This was leadership. The lobby was no longer a place of leisure. It had transformed into a stage of reckoning. Guests who minutes ago were sipping champagne now stood shoulder to shoulder, their phones raised like lanterns in a dark cave, recording every breath, every word. The cameras weren't just capturing Malcolm Reed. They were capturing the collapse of an old order and the beginning of something uncharted. Malcolm remained composed, his shoulders squared, voice steady. He had fired Harold Whitman on the spot. Sophie Lang trembled at the desk. Carl Benson lingered with guilt heavy in his stance. But Malcolm wasn't finished. "This hotel," Malcolm began, his tone even, "has built its image on marble floors, gilded ceilings, and overpriced wine lists. But beneath the glitter, it has fostered a culture that treats some guests as royalty and others as trespassers." He paused, letting the words echo through the cavernous space. The silence that followed was thick. "I will not tolerate that. Not as an owner, not as a leader, and not as a man who knows what it feels like to be told he does not belong." Sophie let out a quiet sob. A guest near the concierge desk muttered, "This is history happening." Malcolm turned his gaze on the assembled staff housekeepers in crisp uniforms, bellhops lined near the elevator, bartenders frozen mid-polish. Most had stayed silent through the earlier humiliation, watching but not intervening. Their silence had been as sharp as words. "Every member of tonight's staff," Malcolm said, his tone neither cruel nor forgiving, "is suspended pending review, effective immediately. You will not report to work tomorrow." Gas swept the room. A bellhop dropped the luggage cart he'd been clinging to. One of the bartenders muttered under his breath, "Oh, God." Malcolm raised his voice just enough to cut through the noise. "Some of you chose complicity tonight. Some chose cowardice. Some, perhaps, feared for your jobs if you spoke up. But fear is no excuse for stripping another human being of their dignity." Carl Benson's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He took a step forward, voice shaking. "Mr. Reed, I should have spoken up. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry." Malcolm studied him. "Do you understand that silence is not neutral? Carl's silence sides with power. Tonight, you sided with Harold Whitman, not with what was right." Carl nodded, shame etched across his features. "Yes, sir. I know. But if you'll allow it, I'll prove I can be better. Just give me that chance." The room held its breath, waiting for Malcolm's verdict. He let the moment stretch, weighing the plea. Finally, he spoke. His tone softened, but still resolute. "Stand up, Carl. Don't beg on your knees. If you want redemption, earn it with your actions, not your apologies." Carl straightened, his jaw tight. "I will." The guests erupted in hushed whispers, some impressed, others stunned by Malcolm's balance of justice and mercy. Malcolm turned back to the staff. "This is not the end of your careers, but it is the end of this culture. From tomorrow forward, Summit Crown will operate under a new mandate: dignity first. Every guest, regardless of skin color, clothing, or background, will be treated as equal. And if any one of you cannot live up to that, you will not work here." His words rang out, caught by dozens of cameras. Already hashtags were being born. Dignity first, justice at Summit, or Reed reckoning. Malcolm wasn't finished. He opened the folder again, sliding out another set of papers. "To those of you who filed complaints and were silenced by non-disclosure agreements, those agreements are hereby null and void. You are free to tell your stories." The crowd gasped. Even some staff members blinked in shock. NDAs were sacred in this industry. No one dared dissolve them. And to those harmed, Malcolm continued, "Reed Global is establishing a justice fund of $3.2 million. Every settlement hidden in shadow will be replaced with public accountability. Every voice ignored will be heard." The murmurs swelled. Guests nodded, some clapping softly, others recording every syllable. A young housekeeper named Lena Torres stepped forward, her voice quivering but strong. "Mr. Reed, I was at the desk earlier. I saw what happened. I wanted to speak, but I froze. I don't want to freeze again." Malcolm looked at her carefully. "Then speak now." Her eyes glistened as she raised her chin. "What they did to you, it wasn't right, and it wasn't the first time. I've seen guests treated like they don't matter because of how they look. I've seen staff punished for even questioning it. Tonight, I want to stand with you." The lobby fell into reverent silence. Malcolm nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his face. That's how change begins, with one voice, and then another, and another. He turned his gaze back to the crowd of witnesses, guests in tuxedos and gowns, who had stood silently as he was humiliated. You too, had a choice tonight. You could have spoken. You could have stood. Most of you did not. A heavy guilt settled on the faces of some. A middle-aged man in a navy suit lowered his phone, cheeks flushing. Malcolm's tone was not accusatory, but reflective. Silence from bystanders is the soil where discrimination grows. Don't think you're innocent because you didn't speak the insult yourself. Indifference feeds injustice. For the first time, someone in the crowd began clapping, then another, and then more, until the lobby filled with the sound of hands striking together. It wasn't applause of celebration. It was the raw rhythm of awakening. Malcolm raised his hand, quieting them again. Tonight was a reckoning. Tomorrow will be reform. We will rebuild this hotel, not with marble and chandeliers, but with respect. Only then will Summit Crown truly shine. He stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle like dust after an earthquake. And in that silence, everyone knew the old Summit Crown had ended tonight, and a new one had been born. The lobby buzzed with the kind of charged silence that feels heavier than noise. Reporters had already pushed their way inside, cameras perched on shoulders, microphones thrust forward like weapons hungry for truth. Guests shifted nervously, torn between shame at their earlier complicity and excitement that they were witnessing something unforgettable. Malcolm Reed stood at the center, steady as a pillar, the folder still in his hand. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked around at the marble columns, the chandeliers, the polished floors, and then at the faces, staff, guests, strangers who had all become unwilling characters in a drama they could never have imagined. 2 hours ago, Malcolm began, his voice calm, deliberate. I walked into this lobby like any other guest. I had a reservation, a credit card, and the same expectation of respect that every paying customer deserves. But instead of service, I was given suspicion. Instead of dignity, I was handed humiliation. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Phones tilted forward, capturing every syllable. I was told I did not belong, that I looked out of place, that this hotel had certain standards. Malcolm paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. And let's be honest about what that meant. It meant black skin and casual clothes was enough to brand me an intruder. It meant that in this palace of luxury, my presence was treated as contamination. The sting of his words made some guests flinch. Sophie Lang covered her face with trembling hands. Malcolm held up the folder. What the staff here didn't know was that I am not just a guest. I am the owner. My company purchased this hotel chain 3 weeks ago. Tonight, I came undercover to see how my guests are treated when no one is watching. And what I found is the very rot I built my career to fight. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Some guests who had cheered Harold earlier now shrank into corners, avoiding the camera lenses that might catch their hypocrisy. This isn't about one rude manager or one bad night. Malcolm continued. It's about a system, a culture, a pattern that has been allowed to fester because people in power thought there would never be consequences. He let the silence breathe, his eyes finding the young housekeeper, Lena Torres. She stood straighter now, emboldened by his earlier acknowledgment. Tonight, Malcolm said, his voice tightening, we change that pattern. Tonight, accountability begins. He pointed to the cameras. Every person watching this, whether you're in this lobby, on your couch at home, or scrolling through your phone, you are part of this moment. And I want you to remember one thing. Dignity denied anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere. The line landed like a thunderclap. People froze, their screens glowing as the words were typed, tweeted, and retweeted in real time. Dignity everywhere began flashing across timelines before Malcolm even finished speaking. Some of you here tonight clapped when I was escorted out. Some filmed, hoping for entertainment. Some looked away, thinking silence would make you innocent. But silence is not neutral. Silence is consent. His eyes swept the room again, calm but unyielding. Ask yourselves, what did you choose tonight? Did you protect comfort, or did you protect dignity? A woman in pearls lowered her head, cheeks burning. A young black couple in the corner squeezed each other's hands, tears brimming in their eyes. Malcolm's voice softened, dropping almost to a whisper. I know what it feels like to carry humiliation quietly. I know what it feels like to be told, in subtle and blatant ways, that your money, your education, your humanity aren't enough. But I also know this shame can be fuel, pain can be power, and tonight that power will not be wasted. The applause began hesitantly, then grew. Some guests clapped with relief, others with conviction, still others out of guilt. It swelled into a rhythm, but Malcolm raised his hand, quieting them once more. This is not about applause. This is about reform. I have dissolved the NDAs silencing past victims. I have fired those who abused their authority. I have suspended those who enabled it. And tomorrow, we rebuild. With new training, new leadership, new values. This hotel will no longer be a monument to exclusion. It will be a model of dignity. Reporters surged forward with questions, but Malcolm spoke over them, not with force, but with gravity. You will ask me why I made this public. Why not handle it quietly, in a boardroom, with lawyers and press releases? The answer is simple. Because discrimination thrives in the shadows. Silence is its strongest ally. Transparency is its enemy. The young tech entrepreneur who had been filming from the bar whispered, "This is a Harvard case study unfolding live." Malcolm's eyes met the cameras one last time. Tonight isn't just about me. It's about every person who has been told they don't belong. Every employee punished for raising their voice. Every guest humiliated for daring to walk into a space their money had already paid for. Tonight is your vindication. His gaze returned to the staff, particularly Lena and Carl. This hotel will become a place where dignity is not negotiable. And it starts with those willing to choose courage over comfort. A hush swept the lobby again as Malcolm closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. Remember, this power without accountability is cruelty, but power with accountability can transform the world. With that, he stepped back. The cameras surged closer, the room breaking into chaotic noise, reporters shouting, guests whispering, staff members scrambling to understand what tomorrow might look like. But above the noise, one phrase echoed in every corner, on every phone, across every social feed. Dignity denied anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere. By the time Malcolm Reed left the lobby, the storm had already spilled beyond the gilded walls of the Summit Crown. Reporters dashed to their vans, satellite dishes pointed toward the night sky, anchors rehearsing the headline that would run before dawn. Black CEO exposes racism at his own hotel. The phrase was electric, impossible to ignore. Within minutes, hashtags multiplied, rose, dignity, everywhere. Reed reckoning. Summit Crown scandal. A 20-second clip of Malcolm declaring, "Dignity denied anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere," was retweeted by senators, athletes, and activists before midnight. Inside the hotel, the fallout was immediate. Staff members huddled in clusters, whispering about suspension notices, uncertain paychecks, and futures hanging by a thread. For years, the Summit Crown had functioned under a rigid hierarchy where silence was survival. Now, silence had become evidence. Carl Benson sat alone in the employee break room, his security badge dangling from his hand. He stared at the laminated card as if it were a relic of another life. For the first time in years, he admitted the truth to himself he had hidden behind neutrality. Tonight, Malcolm had stripped away that shield. Neutrality was complicity, and Carl couldn't shake the image of Malcolm's steady eyes when he'd said, "Stand up, Carl. Don't beg on your knees," down the hall. Sophie Lang sobbed quietly into her hands. She had been the face of rejection at the front desk, the one who'd said, "This hotel has standards." Those words looped in her mind like a broken tape. She hadn't thought she was a racist. She told herself she was just following protocol, just trying to do her job. But replaying the scene, she couldn't deny the sharp edge in her tone, the assumptions packed into each syllable. Her phone buzzed with texts, some from friends urging her to delete social media before trolls found her, others from relatives furious about the embarrassment. But one message from her younger brother cut deepest. "Why would you treat someone like that? You know what it feels like for us." Meanwhile, Lena Torres sat in her small studio apartment on the west side of the city, phone buzzing nonstop. Coworkers were both praising and warning her, praising her courage for speaking up, warning her that hotels often blacklisted whistleblowers. But when she replayed the moment she had raised her voice, she felt no regret. For once, she hadn't frozen. For once, she had chosen courage. The wider world erupted. Morning shows scrambled for panelists. Civil rights lawyers called Malcolm's speech a blueprint for modern accountability. Industry insiders whispered that the entire hospitality sector would have to rethink its training and guest policies. But the backlash was just as fierce. Anonymous accounts claim Malcolm had staged the entire encounter for publicity. One tabloid splashed a headline, "CEO's stunt to boost stock price." Others framed it as a question of class rather than race, downplaying the sting of humiliation he'd endured. Malcolm expected it. He sat in his penthouse, city lights glittering beyond the window, scrolling through the storm with a calm detachment. He knew the cycle: first outrage, then denial, then the slow grind of reform. His job wasn't to silence the critics. His job was to keep the truth louder than the noise. The next morning, the hotel board convened in an emergency session. Lawyers, PR specialists, and investors crowded around a mahogany table polished to a shine. Some were livid. "You've destroyed our reputation in one night," while others were quietly impressed at the precision of Malcolm's message. Malcolm listened, hands folded, until the room quieted. "Our reputation wasn't destroyed last night," he said evenly. "It was exposed. The destruction has been happening for years. I just tore off the mask." His words cut through the defensive chatter. Even the lawyers, trained to think in liability, paused to consider the larger truth. Back at the hotel, cameras lined the block. Guests canceled reservations en masse, while others booked rooms simply to say they had stood in the space where history was made. Local activists staged a silent demonstration outside, holding signs that read "Dignity First." Sophie, unable to sleep, drafted a letter of apology. She didn't know if Malcolm would ever read it, but the act of writing forced her to face what she had done. "I told myself I was protecting the hotel," she wrote, "but I wasn't protecting anyone. I was protecting my fear. And fear is not an excuse for cruelty." Carl, meanwhile, opened his laptop and began writing a statement of his own. Not an apology this time, but a commitment he would testify publicly to the culture of silence that had infected the staff for years. If Malcolm was serious about reform, Carl wanted to be part of it, not as a guard at the door, but as a guard of dignity. Lena didn't need to write. She had already been contacted by journalists who wanted to hear her perspective. At first she hesitated, afraid of retaliation, but Malcolm's words echoed in her mind. This is how change begins, with one voice and then another. She agreed to one interview, then another, her quiet strength resonating with viewers. For Malcolm, the frenzy was both vindication and burden. He had turned personal humiliation into a public reckoning. But he knew the hardest part lay ahead. Viral moments fade. Real reform does not trend. It grinds. Late at night, he sat alone, recalling his childhood visits to hotels with his mother, who had worked double shifts to save enough for a modest vacation. He remembered the way they had been treated, smiles that faded when the desk clerk saw their last name, waiters who suddenly forgot their table existed. That ache had never left him. It fueled him now. Malcolm whispered into the quiet, as if speaking to the boy he once was. This time, we're not leaving quietly. This time, we're staying at the table. The summit crown looked different in the daylight. The marble floors still gleamed. The chandeliers still glittered. But the air carried an edge of unease. Guests whispered in corners. Staff walked with hesitant steps. And the weight of Malcolm Reed's reckoning still clung to every corridor like a lingering storm. Among the guests who had stood silent during Malcolm's humiliation, a few wrestled with gnawing guilt. One of them was David Whitaker, a mid-level tech executive who had traveled to the city for a conference. He remembered clapping when Harold Whitman ordered Malcolm to leave. He hadn't clapped because he believed Harold was right. He had clapped because everyone else did, and he feared standing out. Back in his room, David stared at himself in the mirror. His reflection looked smaller somehow, weaker. The viral clips had already reached his colleagues. One text message from his assistant burned in his mind. "You were there?" "Right." "Why didn't you say anything?" He couldn't answer. For the first time. David understood the corrosive comfort of silence. He'd always considered himself not part of the problem, but last night he saw clearly neutrality was complicity. Meanwhile, Sophie Lang sat in the staff lounge, eyes swollen from another sleepless night. Her apology letter lay folded in her pocket, but she hadn't delivered it. She wondered if words could mean anything when the harm had already been done. She replayed every sneer, every moment she had enforced the unspoken standards of the hotel. The truth was undeniable. She had drawn lines between guests based on appearance, and those lines had wounded more than she wanted to admit. Carl Benson passed by her, his posture heavier than usual. He had spoken with his wife that morning, confessing everything. She had asked one question that pierced him. If you can't protect someone from humiliation, what kind of protector are you? He thought about Malcolm's words. Stand up. Carl, don't beg on your knees. Carl realized he had been begging fear to let him keep his job. begging silence to shield him. But last night, Malcolm had handed him a different path redemption through courage, elsewhere. Lena Torres sat at a diner with a journalist from a local paper. She wore her uniform, still smelling faintly of bleach and linen spray, because she wanted to be honest about who she was. No polish, no PR handler, just Lena. "You weren't afraid?" the journalist asked, recorder on the table. Lena hesitated. "Of course I was afraid. I've got rent due next week, and my little sister depends on me. But fear isn't a reason to stay quiet. If I'd stayed silent, I would have been another brick in the wall that crushed him. And I couldn't live with that." Her words struck something in the journalist. By the next morning, Lena's quote was plastered across news sites. Fear isn't a reason to stay quiet. It resonated with workers across industries who had swallowed their own voices for too long. Meanwhile, David Whitaker found himself unable to sit still. He walked to the lobby, where a few reporters still lingered, and asked to make a statement. His voice trembled, but he forced himself forward. "I was here that night," he admitted. "I didn't speak up. I didn't stop it. I even clapped. And I need to say publicly it was wrong. Silence was wrong. I don't want to be that man again." The reporters, hungry for new angles, broadcast his words. Some mocked him for seeking absolution, but others saw in him a reflection of their own failures. His confession, awkward as it was, became part of the growing conversation. What does it mean to be a bystander? At the same time, Malcolm convened a private meeting with suspended staff. He didn't storm in with fury. Instead, he walked slowly around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "You've all asked yourselves the same question these last 24 hours. He said, "Do I still belong here? Do I still deserve this job? I can't answer that for you. Only your choices can." He paused, then added, "Redemption isn't about words. It's about the courage to face your failures, and then to live differently. If you are willing to take that road, there will be a place for you. But if you cling to excuses, there won't be." Sophie raised her hand, voice quivering. "Mr. Reed, I don't know if I deserve another chance, but I want one. I want to unlearn the things I thought were normal here. I want to serve with respect, not fear." Carl followed, standing tall this time. "I failed you. I failed myself. But I'm done being silent. If you'll have me, I'll help protect this place the right way." Lena's eyes watered as she watched. For the first time, she felt the possibility that her courage hadn't just been a single spark, it might ignite others. Malcolm nodded, but his face remained firm. "If you return under a new covenant dignity first. Break it once, and there will be no second chances. If that feels too heavy, walk away now." No one left the room. Outside, the world debated endlessly, some calling Malcolm a hero, others branding him opportunistic. But inside the summit crown, something deeper was stirring. Guests like David were confronting their cowardice. Staff like Sophie and Carl were facing their complicity. And workers like Lena were discovering their voices could ripple far beyond their uniforms. The storm Malcolm unleashed wasn't just about accountability. It was about awakening. The question no longer was whether the hotel would change, but whether the people within it had the courage to change with it. The boardroom of Reed Global was designed to intimidate 40-foot ceilings, mahogany panels imported from Brazil, a glass wall overlooking the skyline. On most days, it was a place of calm strategy. But on this morning, the tension was sharp enough to rattle the crystal water glasses lined neatly at each seat. Malcolm Reed entered without ceremony. He carried no folder this time, no documents to shield him, just the same measured composure he had worn in the hotel lobby. His presence alone quieted the room. Around the table sat the directors of Summit Crown Holdings, the hotel group Reed Global had acquired. Men in tailored suits, women in conservative blazers, most of them older, most of them accustomed to wielding influence without challenge. Last night's viral spectacle had unsettled them in ways they hadn't expected. "Malcolm," began Charles Dunham, a silver-haired director whose reputation for caution bordered on cowardice. "You've ignited a firestorm. The brand is in freefall. Guests are canceling. Stock is wobbling. You've made yourself the story instead of the solution." Malcolm didn't flinch. "I didn't make myself the story. Racism did. I simply refused to cover it up." Another director, Margaret Hayes, leaned forward. "You could have handled this quietly. Internal reviews, closed-door discipline, controlled messaging. Instead, you turned our hotel into a global stage." "Yes," Malcolm replied evenly, "because the culture of closed doors is what allowed this sickness to spread. Sunlight is the best disinfectant." The room shifted uncomfortably. No one doubted Malcolm's eloquence, but some feared his uncompromising approach. Investors had already called, anxious about their returns. Thomas Barrett, a finance-driven board member with a reputation for ruthlessness, cut in. "Let's not dress this up in poetry. You embarrassed us, you tanked revenue, and you undermined the very staff we need to operate these hotels. If you want to run an activist campaign, fine, but don't drag this company into it." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You're wrong. I didn't undermine the staff. I gave them a choice: fear or dignity, silence or courage. And in that choice lies the future of this company." Barrett scoffed. "Future? The only future I see is lawsuits and losses." Malcolm leaned forward, voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Do you know what destroys shareholder value faster than reform scandal covered up? Festering, waiting to explode. I chose to detonate it on my terms, controlled, public, with a plan for rebirth. That's not destruction, that's strategy." The silence that followed was heavy. Even those who opposed him couldn't deny the logic. Margaret Hayes sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "So what's your plan? How do we rebuild?" Malcolm stood, walking slowly around the table. "First, we establish the Justice Fund already announced, already resonating with the public. Second, we dismantle the old hierarchy. No more NDAs silencing staff. No more promotions for managers who sweep complaints under rugs. Third, we launch mandatory dignity training across all properties. Not a box-ticking seminar, real. Immersive training led by experts who understand bias and service." Charles Dunham frowned. "That's expensive. Shareholders will balk." Malcolm stopped, turning to face him directly. "Cheaper than lawsuits. Cheaper than boycotts. Cheaper than losing the next generation of guests who demand accountability from the brands they support. This isn't expense, it's investment." A few directors exchanged wary glances. Malcolm could sense the cracks forming, but resistance remained. Barrett shook his head. "You sound more like an activist than a CEO. What about profit? What about growth?" Malcolm's eyes locked on his. "What about humanity? Profit built on humiliation is poison. Growth that excludes dignity is rot. You can build empires on marble and glass, but without trust, it all crumbles." "For the first time," Barrett faltered. The words, sharp yet measured, hung in the air like an indictment. Malcolm softened his tone, letting the silence breathe. "We can choose the easy path: denial, cover-ups, a press release full of half-truths. Or we can choose the harder path: accountability, reform, and leadership that sets a new standard. One path keeps us comfortable for a season. The other keeps us alive for a generation. The room sat in stillness. Finally, Margaret Hayes spoke again, her voice quieter now. And if we refuse, if we push back, Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He simply straightened his shoulders. Then I remind you who holds controlling interest. I remind you that public opinion is no longer a storm we can outlast. It's a tide that will drown us if we don't change. And I remind you that I am not afraid of walking away from marble halls if it means standing for dignity. The directors exchanged uneasy looks. They had expected anger, maybe theatrics. Instead, Malcolm's calm certainty unnerved them more. Charles Dunham finally exhaled, the fight draining from him. Perhaps there is merit in turning this scandal into a case study for reform. Margaret nodded reluctantly. If we must endure the fire, better to emerge with a blueprint for others. Only Barrett remained defiant, lips pressed into a thin line. But even he could see the tide turning. The viral clips, the hashtags, the guests speaking out the world, was no longer on their side. Malcolm returned to his seat, his presence commanding even in stillness. This is not just about hotels. It's about what kind of company we are, what kind of leaders we choose to be. The world is watching, and we will not hide. The meeting ended with no vote, but with something stronger, the reluctant acknowledgement that Malcolm had already shifted the ground beneath their feet. Reform was no longer optional, it was inevitable. As Malcolm walked out of the boardroom, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought of Lena's trembling voice, Carl's vow, Sophie's shame, David's confession. Change wasn't theoretical anymore. It was embodied in people, real, flawed, hopeful people. And he knew this was only the beginning. The pushback would come harder. From shareholders, from competitors, from those invested in the old order. But Malcolm was ready. He had faced humiliation in the lobby and turned it into fuel. He would do the same in every boardroom, every arena, every battleground to come. The weeks that followed were unlike anything the Summit Crown had ever seen. The hotel lobby, once a theater of humiliation, became a crucible of change. Reporters still lingered outside, but inside, the rhythm of daily life returned, reshaped by Malcolm Reed's mandate dignity first. Sophie Lang was the first to test what redemption might look like. On her first day back after suspension, she stood behind the front desk, palms damp, heart racing. Every guest that approached was a reminder of her failure, of the night she had let fear and prejudice guide her words. A black couple approached, weary from travel, their teenage daughter dragging a suitcase behind her. So Sophie forced herself to look them in the eyes, not past them, not through them. She smiled, not the brittle smile of obligation, but the open one of intent. "Welcome to the Summit Crown," she said softly. "You are valued guests here. Let me make sure your check-in is smooth." The couple exchanged a glance, as if surprised by the warmth. Their daughter gave Sophie a curious look, then a tentative smile. Sophie felt something unclench inside her. It wasn't absolution, not yet, but it was a step toward it. Carl Benson's redemption unfolded differently. He returned to work not as a guard of silence, but as a protector of dignity. When he saw a bellhop nervously ignore a guest's complaint, Carl stepped in, not to scold, but to guide. "Don't look away," he told the young man. "When someone speaks, meet their eyes. They're not a problem to manage. They're a person to respect." The bellhop nodded, absorbing the lesson. Carl realized that Malcolm had given him a second chance not to erase his failure, but to transform it into teaching. His silence had once enabled harm. Now, his voice could prevent it. For Lena Torres, redemption meant stepping into a role she never imagined. Malcolm had asked her to join the hotel's new Dignity Council, a body of frontline employees tasked with shaping policy and holding leadership accountable. At first, Lena felt out of place. She was just a housekeeper, she thought, but at the first council meeting, she found her voice again. When guests treat staff like they're invisible, she said, it teaches us to treat some guests the same way. We need training that starts with how we see each other, not just how we see the customer. Her words struck the room silent. One manager scribbled furiously in his notebook. Another nodded with genuine respect. Lena realized she was no longer just cleaning rooms. She was helping clean the culture. And then there was David Whitaker, the guest whose guilt had driven him to a public confession. His career had taken a hit. Colleagues teased him. Clients questioned his judgment. But David didn't shy away. He began speaking at small community events, telling the story of the night he clapped for cruelty and learned what cowardice felt like. I thought silence kept me safe, he told one audience, but silence made me smaller. Speaking up may cost you comfort, but it gives you back your integrity. The response surprised him. People thanked him for his honesty, admitted their own failures, promised to act differently next time. His humiliation became a bridge awkward, imperfect, but real. Malcolm watched these arcs with quiet pride. He knew redemption was never clean, never linear. It was messy, filled with backslides and doubts. But he also knew the difference between empty apologies and genuine transformation. What he saw in Sophie, Carl, Lena, and even David was not perfection. It was progress. Still, redemption had its skeptics. Critics online mocked Sophie's attempt to smile her way out of racism. They accused Carl of posturing. They called Lena a pawn and David an opportunist. Malcolm understood the skepticism. Trust takes longer to rebuild than marble floors. But he also believed in lived change. He believed that people, given both accountability and opportunity, could grow. And he knew that showcasing that growth publicly mattered as much as punishing failure. One evening, Malcolm convened the four of them in a quiet conference room. He looked each of them in the eye, his tone both gentle and firm. Redemption, he said, isn't about proving to me that you've changed. It's about proving to yourself that fear won't guide you anymore. It's about making different choices when the world isn't watching. Because most of the time, it won't be. Lena nodded, her voice soft. The world may not watch, but I'll still hear myself. That's enough, Sophie added, her hands clasped tightly. I want to be the kind of person who doesn't flinch at difference, not because it's policy, but because it's right. Carl's voice was rough, but steady. I was a guard, but I never guarded what mattered. That changes now. David exhaled, as if releasing a burden. I may never erase that moment, but I can keep telling the truth about it. If it saves one person from making the same mistake, then it means something. Malcolm leaned back, letting their words settle. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a smile. You've all learned the same lesson, he said. Dignity isn't given by a hotel or a policy. It's given when we see each other clearly. And from what I see right now, you've started to see. The ripple effects of Malcolm Reed's reckoning spread far beyond the Summit Crown's marble floors. What began as a late-night confrontation in a hotel lobby had now grown into a movement, spilling into boardrooms, universities, and city councils. Churches played Malcolm's viral quote on Sunday mornings, "Dignity denied. Anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere." Activists carried it on banners during marches. High school teachers used it in lessons about history and ethics, asking students, "What does dignity mean to you?" But Malcolm knew that words without structure fade. So he launched what he called the Dignity First Initiative, a program designed to embed accountability into the DNA of institutions. The initiative offered training modules, anonymous reporting tools, and community partnerships that other companies could adopt. He didn't want Summit Crown to be an isolated story. He wanted it to be a template. At a town hall meeting in the city's civic center, the scale of the impact became clear. Hundreds gathered employees from different hotels, taxi drivers, retail workers, and ordinary citizens who had lived versions of the humiliation Malcolm endured. They filled the auditorium with murmurs of anticipation. Malcolm stood at the podium, Lena Torres beside him, Sophie and Carl seated in the front row, David Whitaker further back. Cameras were set up, local news broadcasting live. "This is not about one hotel," Malcolm said, his voice calm but firm. "This is about a pattern in our society where dignity is treated like a luxury instead of a right. I won't accept that, and neither should you." He introduced Lena, who stepped nervously to the microphone. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I'm not a manager. I'm not a lawyer. I clean rooms. But I know what it feels like to be invisible. And I know what it feels like to finally speak. Fear told me to stay quiet. But speaking gave me back my dignity. And if I can do it, you can too." The crowd erupted in applause. Some stood, cheering her courage. A taxi driver in the audience wiped his eyes. Carl Benson followed, his tall frame commanding attention. "I used to think silence made me neutral, but silence made me complicit. I can't change what I didn't do that night, but I can change what I do from now on. Every person I meet, guest or worker, deserves to be seen. And I'll make sure of it." The crowd roared again. David Whitaker didn't take the podium, but he spoke to a reporter in the audience afterward. "I was the man who clapped for cruelty. I regret it every day. But I'll keep telling that story, because owning our failures is part of redemption." The town hall ended with Malcolm outlining the next steps: a partnership with local colleges to integrate dignity training into hospitality programs, a hotline staffed by independent advocates for employees facing bias, a grant program funded by Reed Global to support minority-owned businesses. The press spun it into headlines. From scandal to blueprint, and CEO turns humiliation into reform. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Other hotel chains bristled, calling Malcolm's initiative grandstanding. A rival CEO dismissed it as theatrics for the social media age. Some board members still whispered doubts, worried about long-term profit. Malcolm met the criticism with patience. "Resistance is expected," he told his team, "but history favors those who choose dignity over denial." Meanwhile, stories began pouring in from the community. A grocery cashier shared how she refused to stay silent when a customer belittled a coworker. A teacher wrote that her students had started a dignity club at school. An airport security guard emailed Carl, saying, "I was always afraid to speak up. After watching you, I finally did." For Malcolm, these stories mattered more than stock prices. They were proof that dignity, once ignited, could not be contained. Late one evening, Malcolm sat in his office reviewing the Justice Fund applications. Many were heartbreaking employees silenced for years, guests dismissed and humiliated. But among them was one that stood out: a handwritten letter from an elderly woman who had been a guest at the Summit Crown years earlier. They told me I was in the wrong place. She wrote in neat cursive. I left in tears and never told a soul. I thought my pain didn't matter. Watching you speak showed me it did. Malcolm leaned back, the letter trembling in his hand. It was a reminder that behind every policy, every press conference, every hashtag, were real lives scarred by indignity, and it deepened his resolve to push further. At the next board meeting, Malcolm presented the letter. "This is why we reform," he said quietly. "Not for headlines, not for profit. For people who carry silent wounds, for people who deserve healing." The directors, once skeptical, began to see the broader picture. Some nodded. Even Thomas Barrett, who had resisted the hardest, said nothing this time. The Summit Crown slowly became known not as a scandal site, but as a symbol. Guests came not just for the chandeliers, but for the assurance of respect. Employees spoke openly about issues without fear. Competitors watched reluctantly, some adopting reforms of their own to keep up. And through it all, Malcolm reminded his team of in truth. Reform was not a destination, but a daily choice. Every day we choose dignity, he told them, or every day we risk losing it. The storm had lasted months, but by the time spring arrived, the Summit Crown had become something else entirely. It was no longer just a hotel. It was a symbol. Travelers booked rooms not for marble or chandeliers, but because they wanted to stay where change had begun. Conferences used the ballroom as a backdrop for panels on equity. Students posed for photos in the lobby, calling it the place where dignity fought back. Malcolm Reed walked those same halls often, not to inspect the decor, but to watch the people. Staff who once kept their heads down now held them high. Guests who once felt invisible now felt seen. The air was different, lighter, but sharper, as if truth had replaced pretense. Yet Malcolm knew the final test wasn't in what had already been achieved, but in whether the movement could outlast him. That test came sooner than expected. A powerful investor group, alarmed by the Justice Fund payouts and the cost of mandatory training, threatened to pull support unless Malcolm toned down his reforms. They framed it as concern for profit. But Malcolm knew it was fear that accountability would spread beyond the hotel industry. In a packed shareholders' meeting, the confrontation reached its peak. Cameras lined the back wall, employees filled the aisles, and reporters scribbled furiously. One investor, stern-faced, leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Reed, this dignity experiment has been very inspirational, but it's unsustainable. Our job is to maximize returns, not to play social reform." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to side against Malcolm publicly, but afraid of losses. Malcolm rose slowly, walking to the front. His voice was steady, calm, but each word carried iron. "Returns without responsibility are robbery," he said. "Profit without dignity is theft from the soul of this company. If you think our business is marble and chandeliers, you've misunderstood everything. Our business is trust, and trust is the most valuable currency we have." The words cut through the air. He held up a letter, the same handwritten one from the elderly woman who had once been turned away. "This guest came here years ago and left in tears. She thought her pain didn't matter. She thought she was invisible. But her story mattered, and every story like hers matters. If we build a company that ignores those voices, we deserve to collapse. But if we build a company that honors them, we will last longer than marble, longer than chandeliers, longer than any one of us in this room." Silence fell. Even the skeptical investors leaned back, disarmed. From the back, Lena Torres stood. Her voice carried, trembling but strong. He's right. I was afraid to speak once, but now I see dignity as the only thing that makes this job worth doing. Carl Benson rose beside her. I was silent too. Silence broke me. But now I'll guard what matters. Not walls, not doors, people. Sophie Lang, voice soft but resolute, added, I was wrong. I let fear decide my actions. But this company gave me a chance to change, and I won't waste it. Even David Whitaker, who had chosen to attend quietly in the back, raised his hand to speak. I was the guest who clapped for cruelty, and I carry that shame. But if a man like me can learn, then anyone can. This movement isn't unsustainable. It's unstoppable. The room erupted. Applause rolled like thunder, drowning out the skeptics. Reporters captured every word. Headlines already forming. From scandal to legacy and dignity as currency. Malcolm let the applause settle before he spoke again. His voice low, but carrying to every corner. Legacies aren't built in moments of comfort. They're built in moments of testing. Tonight we are tested. And tonight we choose dignity. It was the climax, the moment when humiliation had been transformed fully into hope. Months later, the Summit Crown published its first dignity report, a transparent account of every complaint, every reform, every success and failure. Other hotel chains scrambled to follow suit, some reluctantly, others sincerely. The phrase dignity audit entered the corporate lexicon. Universities invited Malcolm to lecture. Civil rights organizations honored Lena, Carl, Sophie, and David as examples of ordinary people transformed by courage. The elderly woman who wrote the letter was flown to the hotel as an honored guest, greeted with flowers and tears. But Malcolm refused to let the story rest on laurels. He reminded everyone that dignity was not a monument, but a practice. The moment we treat it like history, he said, we lose it. One evening, walking alone through the lobby, Malcolm paused at the very spot where it had all begun. He remembered Harold Whitman's sneer, Sophie's trembling refusal, the guests' complicit claps. The memory still stung, but it no longer defined him. What defined him was what came after the courage, the redemption, the movement. He whispered to himself, as if sealing the legacy, humiliation turned into hope. That's the story we leave behind. And with that, Malcolm Reed walked on, not just as a CEO, but as a man who had proven that dignity, once demanded, could reshape an entire world. The story of Malcolm Reed reminds us that dignity is not something given by others. It is something we must protect for ourselves and for those around us. Life often places us in situations where we are underestimated, dismissed, or treated as if we are invisible. For many older viewers, this may echo moments from your own lifetimes when your worth was overlooked because of your background, your job, or simply your appearance. Malcolm's choice teaches a quiet but powerful truth. True strength is not in shouting back, but in standing firm, calm, and clear. When he revealed who he was, he did more than defend his pride. He demanded accountability and created a system that prevented others from suffering the same pain. In our daily lives, the lesson applies beyond hotels or corporations. Whether in families, workplaces, or communities, we all face moments of choice. Do we stay silent, or do we speak up with dignity? Do we look away, or do we stand beside someone being wronged? The message is simple, yet profound. Justice begins not with anger, but with courage. And courage, at any age, can change the world around us. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If Malcolm's story touched your heart, inspired you, or made you think about dignity in a new way? We'd love for you to join our community. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, and together, we can make sure dignity always has a voice.